The DDI-S has been developed to provide a metric for boards and executives of organisations to understand the presence of safety as a capacity within their organisation, with an eye on eventually replacing outdated safety measures, including TRIFR and LTI. Ahead of the launch of the index, we got the authors and designers of the index together.
I'm Michael Turmer, Managing Partner of Clyde & Co.
Hey, I'm Sidney Dekker. I'm a professor at Delft University in the Netherlands and Griffith University up in Brisbane.
I'm Kelvin Ken, Managing Director for Art of Work.
I'm Eleanor Titterton, Partner at Clyde & Co.
To discuss the origins of the index, how this tool could be used to communicate safety as a capacity at a board level, the open source foundation of the tool, and the need for a new way of measuring safety.
So the scholarly scientific story behind this, I think, really starts at least 10 years ago, if not more, with the realization that I think many people in industry would share, that measuring safety by the absence of negative events, of which you have ever fewer, becomes an increasingly silly exercise that doesn't really yield any information about how safe the system actually is. This is compounded by lots of data that that organizations have been sharing with us and that show up in the research, in fact, globally, that a record of low numbers of negative events, that is, you have very few personal injuries or have very few incidents, is actually not predictive for whether you're going to blow things up and have fatal accidents or major incidents just tomorrow. They may, in fact, just be around the corner. There's a number of reasons for why those things are not predictive for badness generally, but the more important, I think, scientific realization was this: the idea that as long as we keep measuring safety by the absence of something and we try to reduce whatever it is that we don't want, at some point we're going to run out of anything to measure. At some point we're going to then run out of knowing what to do to make it even better. And so there's a silliness that is locked up in this, that is actually, known by the formal name of formal phrase of the fundamental regulator paradox. If you want to regulate a complex machine, then it becomes very difficult to do so if the only data trace that you're getting out of that machine is some negative that is close or at zero. What are you going to run the bloody thing on, right? And this is the transition that started happening with work of colleagues like Eric Holnagel and others some 10 years ago, that said safety should really be seen as the presence of capacities that make things go well, rather than the absence of negatives. Because if you see safety as the presence of capacities that make things go well, there's stuff to do, there's stuff to latch onto. It's a positive story. It's a story of managing, of building a culture, of making things happen, of actionable items that you can latch onto and attach some forward-looking accountability to. So that's the broader story that drove into view the dire need for something concrete for industry to start working with.
I mean, for me, one of the exciting things about this project has been it's been a story of collaboration and a story of like-minded people coming together to solve a problem in the most constructive way. So I think this group came together specifically around a particular project briefed by a client, which started with what is the justification for moving away from the existing indicators? And is there any reason, any threat associated with moving away from TRIFR and other negative performance indicators? A footnote to that project was, can we come up with an alternative to that? Interestingly, the people associated with this took the challenge of coming up with the alternative and made that the project rather than the easy task of putting down something, which I think is a credit to this collective and the approach, the constructive approach that we've each respectively have taken to safety. How do we make it better? How do we actually come up with things that are positive? How do we construct ways in which people can find tools that they can use in a practical way. It's very easy to tear something down. It's a lot harder to build something up and to withstand the scrutiny of your peers in terms of what you have built up and recommended as an approach. And so in that sense, that was what brought us all together. It was a project around whether TRIFA has an underlying value, and resoundingly, the answer that this group came up with was that it did not, and in fact, it was, in many respects, misleading in terms of what it was measuring and what it was telling you, and how it was encouraging you to spend your resources and time. And then, secondly, if it wasn't TRIFA, what else could it be? And I remember Kelvin coming into a room with a big spreadsheet and saying, "What do you think of this? What do you think of that?" And then we sat there for an entire day, just tearing apart all the alternatives as being not fit for purpose, not being appropriate as measures for going forward. And interestingly, one of the reasons that we got involved, Alan and I, in Clyde & Co., was this myth around the fact that there was something legal about TRIFA. There was some underlying legal obligation for a board to report on TRIFA, that moving away from it would expose a board to liability, either personally or organisationally. And of course, the organisation we're working with was a global organisation, a global mining organisation, and so the answer had to be not just an Australian answer, but rather a global answer. Would moving away from TRIFA somehow expose them to liability? Well, interestingly, when you survey the laws around the world, you find no justification for why you would use TRIFA as a reporting mechanism. More so, given all the problems associated with TRIFA, there is a very valid argument that you might be creating risks by simply relying on TRIFA as a measure of safety performance. And that's a very confronting proposition to put forward. But it's an accurate proposition. It's what the conclusion that the survey of the legal obligation leads you to. And so this challenge of actually coming up with something that had a legal foundation, in addition to having a safety integrity intellectually, academically, and in practice, was the challenge that we all embraced.
I'll tell you this, guys. I'll tell you this. The idea that I always get when I look at the due diligence index now, it looks, what's the right word? It somehow has a finished look, as in it's comprehensive, it's complete, it's all there. It's all there. It's all there. Not only that, what we found very quickly was the beautiful overlap between the due diligence requirements that sit in this index and the research based on resilient engineering, telling us how organizations can survive in a complex adaptive universe where they actually have to adapt and change and meet challenges that they don't even know yet are around the corner. And so, to me, the convergence of those two lines belie the amount of work that Kelvin and Michael and Alana did, as well as others, to figure out what should go in, what should go out. Because by the time you end up with the product that we now have, you go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Why are you not yet measuring it?
That's it. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, the most satisfying aspect of this project was actually the collaboration with clients who were giving us data and feedback around what works and what doesn't work. And us having to actually respond to that and tweak and try something else. And
but Michael, but the touchstone wasn't necessarily the client base, because in science we get tired of this, how do I apply this type of question that you always get, right? No. We got to think about what's the next thing, where to push ahead. You worry about the problems today, we worry about the problems tomorrow, right? That's our job. And so what mattered for me, what the touchstone was for me, for us here in science, in the research base, was what does the scholarly literature say about these indices and what they tell us about how safety and resilience really is organized in an organization? And what it turns out to be is, oh my God, it's there. It is there. There's nothing that's not there. And so that's what's so exciting about it.
And what I love is that it is really giving officers that assurance piece around their personal legal obligations as well. It's all fully aligned across all of that, that it is linked to each of those 6 elements of officer due diligence under the work health and safety legislation, but in a practical way that brings people closer to how work is actually performed and understanding that state of capacity.
But as you were interrogating, that's the wrong word, inviting business to comment, reflect, help guide what is in, what is out, how these things should be done. Michael, Elena, particularly you, how did you manage this main concern that people come back to and say, oh, so you're telling me to do more work? I cannot do more work. There's already, we're oozing with initiative fatigue. Go away. Don't make me measure more. Right? How do you parry that? What do you say? What is the message that we have?
I think it's a question of what do you want to put the effort in and what return do you want from that effort? For me, a lot of effort goes into measuring something that really has no safety value and makes you feel good about, just measuring what everyone else is measuring, being part of the pack. And the challenge has been to actually convince people to start thinking about measuring things that give them some insight, that actually give them some guidance, that achieve the objective that they are setting out to achieve. And these are real conversations that we're having with board members. These are not conversations, theoretical conversations. What people want out of a safety performance indicator is what Alana referred to, the assurance that safety is working in their organisation. They actually have a state of safety in their organisation. We can talk and debate that. They want to know that they are meeting their legal obligations, and then thirdly, they want to compare their performance to their peers. Now, most of these conversations are driven by non-executive directors. These are individuals who sit on multiple boards, who jump from board to board, and want to, in a quick way, be able to compare the safety performance of one organisation that are on to another. That's the value that they add to the organisation at a board level. The value they add is their insights from sitting on multiple boards. And to me, TRIFA meets none of those criteria, none of them. It gives you no insight in relation to the state of safety. It gives you no assurance from a legal obligation perspective, and it's not comparable because you're not comparing apples with apples.
But the answer I think that people really need to hear to deal with the concern that I first meant, assurance is good, it's all necessary, but you're probably measuring this stuff already. Just those words, right? Unless that is patent and empirically untrue, but something like that, we're not just asking you to do a whole bunch more work than you're already doing. You're already doing this. You're just not using it. You're not asking the right questions about these things that you probably are already measuring.
I'm not sure that that's right, though, Sydney, just because I think it depends on the organisation and the state of their maturity and where they are in this conversation, right? Well, so for some organisations, they're on the safety differently journey. They're seeing people as the solution, and they're already ready for some of that because they are doing learning teams, they are doing worker insights. But for a whole bunch of organisations, these concepts of those sorts of things are brand new, and so it really depends where the organisation is, how quickly they can go on this journey, and they need to understand that it is a journey that's going to take them a number of years to go on. But they are going to be learning about safety capacity all the way along, and they will be maturing through that and learning about their maturity through that.
One of the things we're not tackling in these conversations, to build on Alma's point and the point that you're making, Sid, is the fact that the people that are most invested in Safety One are the very people who are required to collect the data for the board reporting. So you're probably right that the business probably has some form of worker insight activity going on. There's probably some form of learning teams going on, but it's going on at an operational level. What the challenge that we've encountered is that a lot of the safety institutional and bureaucratic exercises are tightly held by the safety professional. And so for them, in some organizations, if they're not already on this journey, this is a step change. And in some cases, it can be quite confronting because they have an institution, a system, a way of measuring things. That way of measuring things gives them comfort. They have presented to the board that this is the measure that validates the series of bureaucratic activities that underpin the safety program. And guess what? They've been successful in convincing boards of that fallacy. That requires walking back probably a decade's worth, if not more, of, to borrow a terminology in a different context, drift away from the purpose of indicators. This has been a drift by the safety profession away from the true calling of safety.
So if we move into that true calling and we think about capacity, Kelvin, I know that this is an area that you are absolutely passionate about, that gave rise to, in a sense, being part of and driving collaboration and thinking about performance differently. I'm very keen for you to unpack how does the due diligence index then measure performance differently? What does it actually do? Or you can answer the question, what doesn't it do? Because obviously we can't give you the coffee maker, toaster, and the oven all in one. So you've had to, in this collaboration, narrow things down. So what does it actually measure? What's it actually do? And what doesn't it do?
So I think a number of things that we should touch on. I go back to Michael's reflection about when we sat down with a spreadsheet of all of the measures that were in place. And particularly we'd seen a shift into this concept of lead and lag indicators and some perception that lead indicators were about capacity. And what was very clear when we look at all of that is the lead indicators were not about capacity. They were about the counting of things in the majority of space. The lag indicators, and again, Michael, you use this term, predictive capacity, and Sid's been talking about this a lot. Neither the lead nor the lag indicators give predictive capacity about where the next safety problem is going to occur, or where you've got true safety capacity in the organisation or not. And Michael, I still reflect on a conversation where we sat down over coffee in the Natural History Museum in London with a piece of paper and doing a sketch on it, and started talking about the due diligence elements in that space and how they connected to all the ideas that Sid and all of that had brought through about this idea of capacity. And in this context, it was very much about thinking about how do we connect and change the conversation with the board, and how do we connect them to understanding the safety capacity of the organisation. And that's where the format of this started to materialise. The index itself, I think one of its first purposes is to shift that conversation with the board, is to get them to ask better questions. So rather than point the finger is, why is this number not lower than it is, the TRIFR number? Because that's I think the boards understand is this number is a number, it should be smaller. They don't even understand what the context of that number is to any regard. And also, we've got this problem of chicken and egg, because Sid, you're talking about, we've got this industry of safety that goes, if its purpose is to produce this stuff and report to boards. So they're saying we're meeting the needs of the board, they're demanding all of stuff. And then you go to the board and then they're saying, well, other organisations count this and therefore we should be counting these things. Therefore our safety team should be reporting all these things. None of these discussions were about that predictive safety capacity, in the organisation. And that's where the due diligence index, I think, has its real power. It creates a discussion particularly about learning. I think that's the real shift in the due diligence index is let's embrace the learning organisation type thinking and the activities around safety too, and understand how do we understand work is done, how do we understand how that work is done successfully, and what are the things that challenge that work. And this is where the index really starts to enable that process. It's built around worker insight. It's built around learning teams. It's built around understanding the difference between work is done and work is intended and the gaps that sit beside that. It's built around understanding how we comply with our obligations. And it's built on a true verification of, are people truly engaged, and what does that engagement actually look like from a very simple format. So I think that's the nature of the elements. It goes into meeting those obligations for the board, but it also changes what and how we actually talk to the board and how we talk to operational levels about what is the nature of their work and how we're meeting those requirements is a discussion they're very interested in. So it looks right to them. It then looks right to the board in they're getting a context of thinking about, it doesn't look like we've got a good match here in how we're resourcing our work and the needs of the work in that space. Why is that? What's happening in that space? What should we do differently? Let's go and get some learning teams and put more of those in place. So it's driving a different activity. And it's also shifting that recognition that expertise within the organisation really sits where the work is done, and the board is not getting that intelligence back. And this, I think the due diligence index really harnesses and recognises, how do we learn what people know so that we can make better decisions as an executive?
So I'm just wondering, you've set a great foundation. I even want to then talk a little bit about, well, how does this actually help then the decision makers? Because you've called this out for the board. You've used this term, Kelvin, of predictive capacity. That makes sense not only for a board, but makes sense operationally, that facilitates learning, that leads to improvement. So I'm really interested in your reflection then. How could a board and leaders use this data more meaningfully? What different actions would it potentially drive? And I'm also very interested in the compliance question.
Yeah, Mike, I might take the first part of that in terms of that question. I think if we take one of the measures within the index, which I think is quite central to it, being the resourcing measure.
Yes.
The resourcing measure really is this question about understanding whether the organisation is providing what people need, both from a management and supervision position and how work is done, against what they need to meet to do the work of the organisation. So you got this is this goal conflict question that we're always asking in this space. The organisation generally has a need to deliver an outcome for a set of stakeholders, mainly shareholders, in that regard. So it is trying to do work as hard and fast as it can, and people are trying to meet that requirement. What this part of the index does is starts to give an indication, have we set people up for success or not? So for me, the engine of this in terms of from a leadership and a board level is this gives you an indication of where do we need to unpack things and understand things more, where we're starting to see a gap between what is needed and what is provided.
Kelvin, just to that point, one of the things I really love about the methodology around that measure in the due diligence index is that we are surveying the perceptions of leaders, supervisors, workers, subject matter experts to get those perception differences so that boards can really understand what is the perception on the ground in those different cohorts. And you've got that opportunity to close those gaps where there are perception differences between what you think is there and what's actually there.
And Eleanor, the really interesting one in that is we just don't do that at the frontline worker level. We do that in that supervisor, because I think that's getting missed a lot, is that the supervisor managers haven't been set up for success to execute what they're required to do in that space. So providing these different pieces of intelligence to help the board actually think differently about its application resources is a really nice output of this measure.
And it goes to what you were saying before, Kelvin, that it's enabling them to ask better questions.
Just going to jump in and just share an actual conversation that I had with an organisation recently, where they asked the question, how do we present board reporting? What are other organisations doing? And what is the standard way in which information is presented in relation to safety performance? I thought that was a pretty high quality question. So I took the opportunity with a particularly progressive Safety 2 HSC to put forward the due diligence index. And they put that forward. And then there were a series of other backwards and forwards clarifications that then went on. And I was quite surprised that there was this level of pushback. So I asked for a meeting with the relevant board. And it was interesting. The question was driven from this desire to do what other people are doing, not appreciating that what other people are doing may actually not be the right thing to do. So this was a well-meaning organisation thinking it was lifting the game or lifting its game by doing what other people are doing, when in fact it was just adopting very bad practices that other people were following, and doing so with the belief they were doing the right thing. And when you have the opportunity to actually explain why the answer to their question and the right answer are and the right approach are different things. So what are other organizations doing? Well, they're all doing the wrong thing and they're measuring the wrong things. What should you be doing? You should be doing this approach. When you actually get to explain that, you have a different reception and a different level of comfort. So one of the most exciting things about this is actually being able to have that conversation at the right level to shift perceptions from status quo and following the herd, the group think type of approach, and then actually being able to engage with safety. In one of the phrases that I've adopted, I think from Sydney, I'm sure that's a Sydney saying, making the distinction between the safety of work and the work of safety. And really, the latter is the bureaucracy that we have created. The former is actually about the substance of what we're trying to achieve. The due diligence index versus its predecessors is exactly that contrast. One is dealing with substance. The other is counting things.
So the distinction between the safety of work and work of safety, or as it was called originally in that paper, was the safety work versus the safety of work. That's actually attributable to Drew Ray, my colleague here in the lab, and a bunch of our students, and in fact, I think one PhD student at the time in particular. But the distinction matters, particularly in relation to what Kelvin was laying out as well, right? The problem that there is so much self-sustaining energy that holds all of this safety work or work of safety aloft. If anything, people's desire to retain their jobs, to be relevant, to be counted, to have what they do be counted. And so, and there's all kinds of sociological and organizational explanations for this. That we don't have to get into the science of it. Although it's interesting always to note, sort of the bureaucratic entrepreneurism that lies behind these things, right? Bureaucracies can actually be quite entrepreneurial in order to keep themselves at work, and the safety bureaucracy definitely shows perhaps a prime example, an apotheosis of this, right, across particularly the Anglo world. And so to dismantle that is in itself a very, or question and critique it is itself a very interesting project. But I think, and this goes back to what you said, Michael, and a bit what Kelvin was arguing as well. If what we can do is, with the due diligence index, in part question the taken for granted assumption that you need Triffitt to be legally compliant. That alone, as you say, is, you keep using the word confronting. You could also turn it around and say it as a revelatory. It's revealing. It's empowering. It's incredibly empowering, right? And so if we look at it that way, you go, hey, wow, what are we going to do now? Well, here's the DDI-S for you.
So I had an aha moment with Michael, actually, and I thought it was about coming to, to prove.
To meet the Lord or to...
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, well, it's a bit like that. I just thought it was so obvious that we should not be using TRIFR or LTFR as a measure. The science is all there. Everybody uses it. Every safety leader you talk to knows.
Understands it. Yeah, they get this. Yeah.
Yeah, no. The aha moment came when Michael and I were having a conversation with a group of global safety leaders. And in that moment, I realised...
talks afterwards, or was this in the formal part of the meeting? Because often this happens when beers and other things start.
No, I think it happened both during and after the meeting.
I know this is a Persian decision aid, right? The ancient Persians did this, right? What the question was, are we going to attack the Assyrians or not, right?
Yeah.
And of course they all make a decision, and then they go, okay, now let's get drunk and talk about it again. And if they ended up with the same decision, both when sober and drunk, it was a good idea, and they would go and attack the Assyrians. So anyway,
so
you did the same thing.
I've been so frustrated for many years, Sydney, is this just is immediately obvious that this measure is not helpful, right? And so we're in this room, a group of safety leaders, and what became apparently clear to me is there's very significant incentives are tied to this measure. And I'm talking monetary incentives tied to this measure. And for that group of safety leaders, they had understood how to tame the measure and deliver the results so that the bonuses would be realised in that space. What we were asking them to do was to step away from, this animal that they understood how to tame, and give them a new animal that they had no concept of how to tame, and to live in the world of reality on the basis of that would be good science and give you good insight and lead to capacity and good safety. I had made the mistake of thinking that was the objective, to meet the goals of performance.
Which is and milking the animal for what it could yield.
Yeah, we've got a group, of practitioners around the world who understand this metric very well, understand how to work with it and manage it, and we're asked to give that up.
The thing is, the science on this is actually not that ambiguous. You can, and perhaps even should, reward people for their work on safety. It's stupid not to, right? The thing is, as long as you keep rewarding them for the absence of negatives, then you're in trouble. This is the thing, right? So I don't think we're saying let's stop paying bonuses for great safety outcomes or great safety. Well, actually, yes, outcomes, but let's not pay bonuses or people or award them otherwise for great safety work, particularly initiatives, the input variables that they stick into the system, right? Do it. But if you reward people for good outcomes, then you're going to get all kinds of distortions and the types of risks and issues that Mark has mentioned.
I'm not suggesting you're going to remove the reward equation, because I think that's always going to be there in one form. It's what you reward them for, I think is critical, Sydney. And shifting that reward into the building of capacity and the building of engagement and those things, I think is worthwhile. As soon as you target it to the absence of something, that's not going to get, the behaviours and practices that we're seeking to sponsor.
We've talked a lot about how the historical measures have been gamed and how safety leaders have been conditioned by the incentives associated with these measures. I've got a question for you. Could the due diligence index face the same perils?
We were challenged really hard by our collaborators to absolutely make sure that it wasn't going to be able to be manipulated in the same way that some of those lag indicators have been for years. And so in the iterations of developing this first version of the due diligence index, we've actually worked quite hard to get to a point where we've limited that capacity for gamification as much as possible. And built into multiple measures inside of those 6 elements is this sort of feedback loop where you are assessing what was the quality of that worker insight experience, what was and getting that that assessment from workers as well as leaders. So it's very difficult to game when you're picking up multiple groups in that way. So we've built that in multiple ways throughout the index. So I think it's difficult to manipulate.
And I'll just add to that, Eleanor, that in that design work, we really have, this has not just been built out of the safety literature and knowledge base. We've built it out of the business literature and practice. And some of the ideas that are better have just got a great track record in actually managing this issue of gamification, and we've used the lessons out of disruption and a range of other fields to actually build this concept. So I think that's been an important part, is the range of disciplines that we've brought together into constructing the due diligence index for safety.
I'm wondering, from the perspective of the board now, they're seeking to meet many objectives. I mean, one of those is, have we met our legal obligations effectively? Are we getting better? Are we improving from a performance perspective? We're managing competing goals. How do you see then the due diligence index informing? One thing you've said is it gives rise to asking better questions, but is there other things that come from that data that would help in having a sense of certainty, particularly around the 6 elements of due diligence and a sense of we have adequately and effectively met those obligations? I'm very interested to explore that for a moment, because I imagine if I'm a person listening and I'm sitting on a board, I go, look, I get what's not working, but where's my certainty at the moment if I was to embrace this?
Well, just to take an example from the index itself. So element 5 of the officer due diligence obligation is about legal compliance. So ensuring that the organisation for which their officers complies with their duties under the legislation, right? And then that translates into a metric for percentage of legal compliance audit corrective actions effectively closed out. That's the measure for element 5 in the due diligence index. So it's not testing a number. It's not, have you done the legal compliance audit? Tick. Well, it's not going to be enough to give a board member the assurance that you are actually achieving legal compliance, but closing out on compliance gaps arising from such a legal compliance audit will. So I think that's going to give them that assurance piece you're talking about, Mark.
I think it's quite exciting. So again, built into the very sort of DNA is moving away of counting of things, which is very much the work of safety. Let's count stuff. And if it gets a smaller number, that's good. If it's injury, if it's more hazards, that's a good thing, and yet it doesn't tell us, it tells us very little about our meeting of our obligations as an officer and our duty of care within the legislation. Michael, I'm wondering, because I'm sure you get challenged, you shared a great story of an organisation that was in a sense progressive, yet challenged and yet struggled. And you made a comment earlier on that I'm really interested. This might be difficult to embrace.
Well, let's talk about the journey that some people are on. So some people who we've known for a very long time that TRIFR and other lag indicators are ineffective, and in some cases it's not just ineffective, misleading, manipulated. That's called for what is in some cases fraudulent. We've known that for some time. Some organisations then have tried and grappled with this idea of how do I introduce the lead indicators, and we talked about our survey of lead indicators and their deficiencies. But even setting aside the deficiencies, one of the challenges of adopting a lead indicator is that you lose two things. You lose the ability to compare your performance to the performance of a peer, and you lose the insight and assurance that comes from being able to compare, in some cases, if you use a qualitative rather than a quantitative measure, to compare past performance with present performance within even the same organisation. One of the comforting things about the DDI is that we've created a community. We haven't just created a tool. We have created a community of people who are embracing the same tool in the same way, measuring things in the same way. That immediately addresses the benchmarking problem. It also gives you safety in numbers. It gives you the comfort of knowing that you're traveling with a pack of globally leading organizations, and that gives boards comfort as they step away from the traditional approach, if you like, and that is absolutely necessary. You in some things, at the highest level, at a board level, the last thing you want to do is stand out from the pack, because that opens you up for criticism. But if you are one of a number of leading organizations that are doing the same thing in the same way, there is some comfort in that community. It allows you to learn together. And then the last thing, and I think I drove the team crazy on this issue, was a non-negotiable for me, and that was it needed to be a number. And it wasn't about, we didn't want to count things for the sake of counting things, but it needed to be a number. And the reason that I was unrelenting about this issue is because I know the mindset of a board, and I know the mindset of a board member. And I know that it's much better, of course, to describe things. But if you are in a busy, heavy agenda board meeting that has gone on, as they do, with a pack of, several hundred pages to read, if the safety report is another 20 pages and you need to decipher through it, to understand it, and to be able to ask questions, that is not going to get the same clarity that a number gives you when the financial information is presented in a number and other information is presented in a number. Down to customer satisfaction, it's still a number. We have learned for a lot, we have taught board members to think in terms of numbers, performance, comparing today to same time last year, month to date, year to date, same month last 12 months, rolling 12 months average. These are all learned tools of measurement for board members. The more you lean into that approach, the more credibility that you will have with your measure and approach. The further away you are from that, the less credible your approach will be, because it just isn't what board members are used to. And we've achieved that. We've achieved the balance between presenting it as a number, but a meaningful number, a number that actually has substance that sits behind it, that allows people to drill down to understand, that's my number for the index, but what is first element, second element, third element, fourth element, fifth element, sixth element? What are my weaknesses? What are my strengths? Can I drill down at within the organization for a division number? Can I actually understand where the weaknesses are, so I can focus the conversation around them? We have basically balanced the best of all worlds in this measure, in my view.
So the question I've got for you then, if we boil it down, so we're going to help with a number. What does that number then mean?
Michael's framing of this was really important, is having a number, but equally when we designed this number, we wanted that number to be simple and immediately recognisable. So if we take our previous numbers of TRIFA, for example, there was no context in that number. The board reading that didn't know it was good, bad or indifferent. So we started this whole concept of, when we design a measure with a calculation, so each of the measures have their own formula behind it, we then interpret that into a scale, and that scale has been rated in terms of undesirable to highly desirable as such. And once we did that, we thought, well, what's the best and most productive word picture that we can create around that scale? And we took that back to some of the language that came out of resilience engineering, and thinking, rather than a traditional scale, of undesirable to highly desirable for such, we'll use that sort of language. So we introduced the scale that introduced the terms like fragile and brittle and resilient. And the bottom of the scale is critical. So really it was just a statement that if you're in this, the original language in that space from resilience was catastrophic, but felt that was unhelpful on the scale. So we adopted the term critical in that space. So has been a really important part of the design, to say that whether you're educated or uneducated in the nature of these different elements, as a board member, you can I'll get I'll say the one-page report, Michael, on the for safety with the indexes in there, and immediately have a point of recognition of where should I start asking questions about. If I've got something saying, our resourcing is fragile, well, that's an interesting word. What does that mean, and what is contributed to that condition within the organisation? So part of the design of this is to create simplicity out of complexity.
We started beginning by talking about the power of collaboration and the importance of community. I'm intrigued, there's always, isn't there always a catch to something? We've talked about this extending in the community. So if I'm interested in the due diligence index, what price does it come? What am I signing up for? That's my first question. And the second question is, what happens to my data if I share it? So let's come to the first. I want to be part of this. And I want to join this community. And I love this analogy you've given, Michael, of having a new tribe to belong to, creating its own sense of critical mass and confidence. But what's it going to cost me?
One of the most rewarding moments in this exercise was actually a conversation that all of us had. But I remember one particular conversation with Kelvin where it's like he read my mind, where he said, one of the things we need to do with this is it needs to be open source. We need to live our values. We need to make sure that we practice what we preach in terms of the safety differently, safety to approach. The objective of this is to improve safety, is to take industry and the profession forward to and set a new normal. And with that in mind, we went about ensuring that this was an open source, free resource for anyone who wants to be involved. And then two, that we created a not-for-profit organisation to steer the further development and maintenance of the standard, and included the pioneers who were part of the initial journey, the brave safety leaders who signed up their organisations to be part of the pilot and worked with us for a number of years, and the institutions that began this project, as well as respected institutions that are recognised leaders in terms of the safety profession on the board of this not-for-profit organisation, this association that we've created. We've gone to a lot of trouble to make sure that this is very much an open source, collaborative community that has one objective, and that objective is to improve safety.
One of the main things for me that has implied, I think, though, is the following, which is, of course, people love free stuff, right? People love free stuff. So give it away for free. They go, oh my God, I want this too. I want this too. And oh, by the way, I'll keep doing Triffer as well. But yeah, give me free stuff, right? That's cute. But what really matters, if you look at the history of the sort of big programs with big brandable names attached to them when it comes to safety, when you look at investigation tools with branded names that get shared in industries or used across industries, almost as if it's some bloody gold standard. If you don't do it like this, it's not an investigation, which, nothing is further from the truth, right? That sort of silly, reflective, uncritical assumption. But what we see, though, and this is true even in anything from say science that gets commercialized, is once it becomes something that is for sale, sunk cost means that it can quickly grow stale. And I want that to sink in, because that really matters, right? This thing, this DDI-S, and the way in which we've set it up is made to suit the adaptive universe. It's made to suit a changing world. It's made to suit a world that will face challenges and sudden twists and turns that we don't know yet. And so instead, if you have something that people have to buy and then train people for, and then they go, oh no, we've sunk cost in this now. We're locked into a contract, and so we'll be using this. Yes, the world has moved on, but we're using this. And so that's the kind of silliness and waste of time and effort and resources that we really want to avoid. And I think almost by design are doing through the way we've set this up.
And in doing so, the Due Diligence Index Council, which is the organisation that has been set up for this purpose, has already established a home, a website, where there's considerable resource already being posted into that domain to enable exactly what you said, Sydney, for people to be self-sufficient in this space and explore it without impediment as such.
Yeah, but Kel, not just self-sufficient. Yes, I agree, absolutely, but also contributory and collaborative. And I think that's the second really important feature of this, which you may want to get into, but the idea, and that's open source, obviously. I think this is, to me, and then I'll hand it back to you, but to me, this shows something philosophically that is incredibly important to emphasize, which is we don't own the right to the knowledge base here. It's not as if we know and everybody else is an idiot. Listen to us. Here's the deal. Here's the gospel. Convert and thou shalt be saved. Yet no, that's not going to work here, right? What this is, it's a collaborative production, right? We need all the expertise and intelligence and resources in the world to make this into a success. Not only a success, but a continued resilient success that survives future shocks and changes as the world moves on. And so it is that input, that give and take, that shared accountability for making this into a success, I think, that is both humbling and I think ultimately super productive.
Which does get to my second point, Sid, which was about the collaboration piece of the Due Diligence Council. That's its purpose, is to create a community of collaboration in that space to contribute, and it will help in terms of evolve the standard over time, and anyone who comes in can contribute. But also, one of the features of this is the ability to share de-identified data, which will have a facility in this space where you can put up your data. It will not identify you as an organisation, but it will align you to industries and the like. And then we can start to actually build some experience of what the measure is showing us and help us to design and evolve the standard as we understand how it interacts with the capacity question.
And also that will be helping people in answering what boards want to see, which is that comparable data set.
So for those of you who want to understand how this actually is anchored in the peer-reviewed literature, in the scientific literature, there is a piece out that has been accepted by the International Labour Review, which is actually put out by one of the United Nations, ILO. And it will appear both in Spanish and in French and in English on the Capacity Index, which is co-authored by Michael and me. And it's an article that's available from the International Labour Organization.
The launch event for the DDI-S will be at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Harbourside Room in Sydney on the 10th of August. The event will also be streamed on YouTube Live, and registration for the live stream can be found in the show notes. And if you want to become part of this community and access the standard, go to duediligenceindex.online.